Welcome to the Deep Dive. You're tuning in for our Tuesday, April 22nd, 2025 update. Your shortcut to understanding what's really shaping our world. I'm Nick.
And I'm Pi. We've sifted through a lot of information today to bring you what matters in global economics, markets, China, and some, well, key news closer to home, too.
Okay, let's dig in. Global economics and the markets. Monday was pretty wild, wasn't it?
It really was. Seems like a major trigger was the U.S. president getting very public about the Federal Reserve.
Right. His attacks on Fed Chair Jerome Powell, even mentioning maybe firing him, that definitely seemed to rattle investors.
Instantly. It's amazing how fast that political talk hit the markets, the scale of it.
Yeah, the numbers really tell the story. The S&P 500 dropped, what, 2.5%?
Yep, a significant dip. And the U.S. dollar, it fell to its lowest in 15 months.
Wow. So classic flight to safety then.
Exactly. You saw the 10-year Treasury yield slide down to 4.4%.
And gold.
Gold surged, broke $3,400 an ounce, a record high.
Unbelievable.
And the Swiss franc climbed too, about 1% against the dollar.
It just highlights how sensitive markets are right now to, well, anything that looks like a threat to the Fed's independence, doesn't it?
It really does. And you hear it in the analyst comments, too. Ian Lingen from BMO Capital Markets basically said any move to oust Powell would just push U.S. assets down further.
Makes sense.
And Helen Given over at Monex Trader, she talked about trust in the dollar potentially eroding if people think there's political meddling with the Fed.
We saw that reflected, right? The Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index fell 1%.
Yeah, and option markets turned pretty bearish on the dollar, too. Lots of bets against it.
And other currencies moved as well. The euro climbed to a 3-year high, 1.15 against the dollar.
And the yen appreciated, too, hit 140.5 per dollar. We'll circle back to the yen in a bit, actually.
Okay, but all this market churn is happening while trade policy is still, well, pretty uncertain.
Exactly. That high-stakes meeting between President Trump and the big retailers, Walmart, Target, Home Depot, really drove home the impact of these tariffs.
Even with that 90-day pause on new tariffs, the existing ones, especially on Chinese goods, are still a major issue.
Absolutely. Yeah. That pause didn't cover everything. So for companies with these big, complex global supply chains, it's still a headache. They're scrambling.
Right. Trying to figure out inventory, pricing. It's tough with so much uncertainty.
Definitely.
But it's interesting. Despite all that business worry, U.S. retail sales actually jumped in March. 1.4%. Biggest jump in over 2 years.
Yeah, that was surprising. Looks like consumers might have rushed to buy things like cars and electronics.
Thinking prices might go up with tariffs later?
Possibly. Auto sales really surged up 5.3%, probably fears about those potential 25% import tariffs on cars.
So you have this sort of weird dynamic. Consumers may be buying out of fear while businesses are warning about trouble ahead.
Precisely. The retailers themselves are saying, look, this could cause broader economic pain. Walmart, even though like 2/3 of their stuff is domestic, they're still actively managing cost swings and supply chain issues. Target's looking category by category at how tariffs hit prices.
And Home Depot. Even sourcing over half their products in North America doesn't make them immune.
Nope. These trade winds are hitting everyone.
And it's not just the retailers. Wall Street strategists are sounding more cautious, too.
That's right. Citi downgraded U.S. stocks, joining Bank of America and BlackRock.
So a growing trend.
Seems like it. And Gareth Barry at Macquarie said something pretty blunt, like, no further justification for U.S. dollar selling is needed. What has already happened is justification enough.
Wow. That kind of statement really signals how serious they think this is.
It does. You put it all together, the trade tensions, the political volatility, the threats to institutions like the Fed. It's chipping away at confidence in the U.S. economy's credibility.
Okay, let's pivot a bit. Let's talk Europe. There's a lot of talk there about rearmament, isn't there?
Yes, definitely. Driven by, well, obvious threats from Russia, but also this feeling that maybe they can't rely on the U.S. security guarantee quite as much in the future.
NATO is still the backbone, but Europe feels it needs to step up more itself.
Exactly. And the European Commission is proposing some big things, like maybe exempting defense spending from EU deficit rules for 4 years, and a huge 150 billion euro loan facility for joint defense buying.
But is it enough? I hear some experts are skeptical.
Yeah, especially for countries with big defense sectors like France, Italy, Spain. They argue the scale of the challenge needs more.
So that's leading to some more radical ideas. New financial structures.
Pretty radical, yeah.
Yeah.
Talk of a rearmament bank, kind of like the EBRD, but for defense. It could fund purchases across the EU and even non-EU countries like the UK.
Interesting. What else?
There's a UK idea for a supranational procurement body, basically buying weapons and stockpiling them together. And a think tank in Brussels proposed a European Defense Mechanism, the EDM, sort of like the Eurozone bailout fund, but
Yeah.
maybe owning strategic assets, even helping arm Ukraine.
But these raise huge questions, right? Would the big countries really agree to give up that much control?
That's the core issue, national sovereignty versus collective action. And, how far can any of this really go without the U.S. blessing, or at least support?
Right.
So the consensus seems to be NATO is still essential, but Europe knows it needs some fundamentally new thinking on defense for the long haul.
Okay. And finally, on the global economics front, let's circle back quickly to the Japanese yen. You mentioned it surged.
Yeah, strongest since last September, briefly hit 140.61 against the dollar on Monday.
And that seems linked to an upcoming meeting.
Looks like it. Anticipation of talks between U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent and Japan's Finance Minister Katsunobu Katl at the G20.
So the market's hoping they'll address currency issues.
Seems that way. The yen gained over 1% for the week, reflecting that hope. It comes as Japan's exchange rate policies are under renewed scrutiny, with all the U.S. trade tensions.
President Trump has accused Japan of keeping the yen weak, hasn't he?
He has, repeatedly. Japan denies it, of course. Prime Minister Shiba is stressing fairness in any currency talks.
But analysts are a bit skeptical about whether a currency deal alone would really weaken the dollar much.
Yeah, places like Goldman Sachs think without resolving the bigger tariff issues, a currency agreement might not change much.
Still, the yen is seen as a safe haven right now.
Definitely. With global recession fears and all the unease about U.S. tariffs, investors are still drawn to it. You see bullish forecasts from Barclays, Nomura, Mizuho Securities.
Predicting further strengthening.
Some are. Mizuho even suggested maybe 133 to the dollar by year-end if we see some tariff rollbacks and a U.S. slowdown.
And Japan's getting ready for tougher talks, too, expanding their negotiating team.
Yeah, they added 10 people to their tariff task force expertise in transport, agriculture, foreign affairs. Now it's 47 strong.
And they have specific things they want to discuss.
Reports suggest proposals like easing Japanese auto safety rules, maybe boosting U.S. rice imports, kind of laying the groundwork.
So Japan's playing defense, strategically positioning itself.
Exactly. The yen's rise reflects that caution out there, and Japan's actively defending its economic turf.
All right, let's now turn our attention to China. You've been tracking the latest there. What are the key things we need to know?
Well, a pretty big development is the White House really pushing the lab leak theory again for COVID-19.
Pushing it hard.
Seems so. They've actually replaced federal pandemic info websites with a new page titled Lab Leak, The True Origins of CO-19.
Wow, that's direct.
Very. It explicitly says a lab-related incident involving gain-of-function research is most likely the origin.
Which is not quite the consensus view across all intelligence agencies, is it?
No, it's not. The FBI and Department of Energy lean that way, but others, like the CIA, are more towards research-related, but maybe not a leak, and 5 other agencies still favor natural spillover.
So there's definitely a strong stance from the administration.
It is, and it's drawing criticism for, potentially politicizing it further when definitive proof is still lacking without more transparency.
How's Beijing reacting to this renewed focus?
Predictably, they're firmly rejecting it, sticking to their line that it didn't start in China, some even suggesting it started in the U.S., though without evidence.
And this could impact U.S.-China relations.
Oh, definitely. Bill Bishop, a longtime China watcher, noted that if the Trump administration pushes hard on this, relations will likely get even worse.
And with the pandemic's cost estimated in the trillions, the origin question is huge, but maybe unanswerable right now.
Very sensitive, yeah. And a clear answer seems unlikely anytime soon.
Okay, shifting to trade. China seems to be responding pretty forcefully to U.S. pressure and the idea of other countries cutting deals with the U.S.
Very forcefully. Escalating rhetoric, clear warnings of retaliation.
Retaliation against who?
Against any country that tries to get a better deal with the U.S. at China's expense. The Ministry of Commerce called the U.S. approach hegemonic politics and unilateral bullying.
Strong words.
And they use this analogy like asking a tiger for its skin to seek benefits at others' expense. They explicitly warned of countermeasures in equal measure if deals hurt China's interests.
So no appeasement.
That's the message. State media like CCTV said appeasement is never an option in a tariff war, and negotiating with a tiger means getting eaten. They're advocating resolute struggle.
All this while the U.S. keeps tariffs up, potentially 245% on some goods, and tries to get allies on board first.
Exactly. And the U.S. is also pressuring countries to buy less from China.
So how is China trying to counter all this?
Well, General Secretary Xi Jinping's recent trips to places like Vietnam, Malaysia, Cambodia, that's part of their dual circulation strategy.
Which means
Boosting their domestic economy while also making global supply chains more dependent on China. They talk about protecting global supply chains, but many see that as keeping them China-centric.
and domestically, they're shoring things up.
Yeah, more economic support. Issuing more of those ultra-long special treasury bonds next year, 1.3 trillion yen, up from 1 trillion this year.
But interest rates are staying put.
For now, the People's Bank of China kept loan prime rates steady. Analysts think they're worried about capital flight if they cut rates too much.
So, tough talk publicly, but maybe exploring diplomatic options quietly.
That's the sense some analysts have, keeping options open behind the scenes.
Okay, now let's talk EVs and batteries. China seemed to be making strides there, particularly with patents.
Yes, but it's about the quality, not just the quantity.
Right.
A study by MGSSI found Chinese firms like CATL and BYD have fewer patents than, say, US or Japanese rivals, but their patents are having a bigger impact.
Bigger impact how?
They get cited more often, they last longer. MGSI's Risk Isaguru said Chinese players carefully select the ones they apply for. It seems very strategic.
And that strategy could help them deal with tariffs.
Potentially, yes. They could license these high-impact technologies to U.S. manufacturers, earn royalties, and sort of bypass the need to build factories in the U.S. to avoid tariffs.
Are we seeing that happen?
There are signs. CATL's partnership with Ford, potential use of TDK Tech supplying GM, it fits that pattern. While Toyota has the most EV patents, CATL actually topped the impact index at 2.7, way above the average of 1.0.
And they're focusing on key areas.
Yeah, lots of patents focusing on things like battery control, making batteries last longer, crucial stuff.
So a very strategic, high-impact approach to innovation in that sector.
Exactly. It could give them a real long-term edge.
Finally, let's get to some other key news updates, including things from the S2 Underground and U.S. News.
Okay, first on the international stage, sad news this morning reporting the passing of Pope Francis. He was 88. The Vatican cited complications from a respiratory illness and a stroke.
That's major global news, obviously.
Indeed. Also internationally, Klaus Schwab, the founder of the World Economic Forum, has suddenly resigned as chair and from the board.
Abruptly. Any reason given?
No official reason for the immediate departure. Of course, he had already stepped back from daily operations last May, but this is quite sudden.
Interesting timing. Okay, turning closer to home now. What's happening in the U.S.?
Well, related to the trade tensions, China announced a new type of retaliatory tariff. It's a bit vague.
How so?
The Ministry of Commerce didn't give specifics, but the idea seems to be targeting third-party nations. Any country that works with the U.S. on tariffs against China could face Chinese tariffs themselves.
A sort of friend of my enemy is my enemy approach.
That's how one analyst put it. It definitely signals how seriously Beijing is taking these alignments.
That could really complicate global trade flows further.
Certainly could. Other U.S. news, Delta Flight 1213 had an engine fire in Orlando this morning.
Oh no, before takeoff.
Yeah, just as they were starting the second engine after pushback. Thankfully, everyone was evacuated safely.
That's good news, at least. Averted disaster. And lastly, something noteworthy out of New Mexico.
Yes, a local county magistrate judge resigned. This follows an incident 2 months ago where an illegal alien, Christian Ortega Lopez, was arrested at the judge's home.
The judge was harboring them.
Admitted to it, yes. Mr. Lopez had been living there. The story gained more traction recently because the judge's quiet retirement lined up with court documents emerging.
Documents suggesting what?
Suggesting that this individual, Mr. Lopez, is a member of Trinda, or TDA. That's a gang recently designated as a foreign terrorist organization, an FTO.
An FTO designation. That's serious.
Extremely serious. It allows for, well, kinetic targeting efforts, among other things. Analysts stressed harboring someone with an FTO tag is like harboring someone with bin Laden's designation.
So the thinking is this FTO connection likely led to the judge's resignation.
That's the speculation. Given how hard it usually is to remove a sitting judge, this connection surfacing probably added significant pressure for that quiet retirement.
Wow. So a local story suddenly connects to major national security issues.
Precisely. Shows how these things can be interconnected in unexpected ways.
Well, that brings us towards the end of our update today. We've certainly covered a lot of ground. Global markets, trade shifts, geopolitical moves, key domestic news.
And you can really see the threads connecting them all, can't you? Economic worries, trade fights, security concerns, they're all feeding into each other in this really rapidly changing global picture.
So as everyone digests all this, we've touched on so many interconnected things. Thinking about it all, what's the one area you think might hold the biggest key to understanding where things are headed in the next few months? Something to really watch.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into today's crucial developments. We really encourage you to keep exploring these topics, keep thinking, and form your own informed perspectives.